for elected officials to put partisanship aside and work together for the people whom we serve, not work for corporations like Norfolk Southern. That's why this morning I introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Vance, my new Republican colleague who's been here only about 2 months, and our colleague Senator Rubio, Republican from Florida, Senator Casey, longtime friend, Democrat from Pennsylvania, Senator Fetterman, also a freshman who's been here a couple months from Pennsylvania, and Senator Hawley from Missouri, to make trains safer as they go through places like East Palestine, Ohio. Railroad company lobbyists spent years fighting every effort that we could make to make our trains and our rail lines safer. Now Ohioans, Georgia's seen it, and the presiding officer, the senior senator from Georgia, has seen it in his state. Ohioans have seen these rail crashes, these derailments just in the last 4 months in East Palestine, the best known one because the damage was greatest, but also Sandusky on Lake Erie, the greatest body of fresh water in the world, the Great Lakes, in Steubenville on the Ohio River, the two greatest natural resources that our state has, the Ohio River and Lake Erie, and drinking water and all kinds of things, recreation for so many people. We've seen, all three of these communities are paying a price. Over the past month, I've been to East Palestine multiple times talking with residents, the mayor, the fire chief, business owners, parents. I've heard their fears for what this means for their town, for their futures. I met with Melissa Smith, who runs a company, a candle-making company. I learned something from her and from my wife that the best candles now are made from soy, not from wax. They smell better, they burn cleaner. Thank you for acknowledging that. It perhaps it's better for the environment. But she owns this candle company. She and her daughter run, but she and her husband have about 4 miles away, have a small farm, have 25 beef cattle. I think she said 25. And she has regular customers. This isn't some huge stockyard. She has regular customers. And these customers have been, whom she sells to every year, who buy a side of beef or buy a full beef. And she told me that she's getting calls from these customers saying, I don't know if we're going to buy this year. Is your beef safe? Because she can't promise that, and they don't know. I think we agree we need to do everything in our power to make sure that an accident like this never happens again, and to make those residents, these 4,500 residents of East Palestine and the township, Unity Township around it. And east of Unity Township, the township east was in western PA, Darlington Township, to make sure people's lives return to normal. So our bill would do a few key things, Mr. President. It includes new safety requirements for trains that carry hazardous materials. Governor DeWine, who served in the Senate before he was governor, is particularly upset that these tanker train cars can come in that are carrying hazardous material but not tell the state or not tell local governments, or more importantly, not tell firefighters and people that are not trained to fight hazmat kinds of fires. The bill also would mean new rules to prevent wheel-bearing failures like we saw in this crash. We know wheel-bearing failures are the #1 mechanical cause of derailments, and it would require 2-person crews on every train. Think about this. This train was more than 150 cars long, more than a mile. It has one locomotive at the front, and then a locomotive about 2/3 of the way or halfway back to help pull the train. There are only 2 employees. There were 3 this time, 2 employees in a trainee. But the railroads want there only to be 1 human being driving these trains. 1 human being in a train that's a mile long, 150 cars. So we would require at minimum 2-person work crews on every train. It's a good first step toward making train and rail lines safer and protecting rail workers. It means real accountability when accidents happen. It raises the fines that right now are so low they don't even make a dent in the profits of these big companies. It's just the cost of doing business. And we've seen what happens, dangerous derailments over and over. As I said, 3 in Ohio just in the last few months. Norfolk Southern's profits have gone up, accidents have gone up. Not exactly shocking. They don't care about these communities, the damages they do, as long as they still bring in enough to do billions in stock buybacks to reward their executives. Last year, they did $3 billion in stock buybacks. This year, they were planning to do several billion more. They backed off after the train derailment, of course. They have laid off in the last 10 years. Norfolk Southern has laid off 1/3 of their workforce. You know what that means? It means track inspections by Norfolk Southern employees are more cursory. They're not as thorough. They're not as safe. They're not done as well. They can't be because these workers are so harried and have so much work to do. The rail companies cut costs by cutting corners, and as I said, cutting workers, leaving crews overworked and unsafe. It happens quarter after quarter. They report every quarter back to their Wall Street analysts all the ways they've cut costs. Communities like East Palestine, be damned. These are the places that are so often exploited by corporate America. My job, when I talk about the dignity of work, I understand my job is to fight for those workers and fight to make sure this never happens again. I'll work with anyone to do this, and I'm thrilled that Senator Vance, my freshman colleague, my second month in the Senate, a Republican, we don't agree on the big issues, but we've listened to the same people and sure as heck agree that we need to do this. I'll work to get these reforms passed, to hold Norfolk Southern accountable, to make sure they pay for every cent of the cleanup. As I said, Senator Vance and I come from different parties, but we've come together for the people of our state, as I did with Senator Portman. And again, major differences on the big issues, but working together for Ohio. We've pressed federal officials to take local legal action. We've pressed for monitoring of potential long-term health effects. That's how you get things done. You listen to the people whom you serve. You find common ground with the elected officials who should be your partners regardless of party. As I said, it's what we did with Senator Portman again and again. We found agreement wherever we could. We got things accomplished. Right after Senator Portman left office, maybe out of office for 2 days in January, he and I and Senator McConnell, who sits at this chair, the Republican leader, with Governor DeWine, a Republican, the governor of Kentucky, a Democrat, and the President of the United States, stood at the Brent Spence Bridge, a project we've been working on for 10 years. 3% of GDP crosses over that bridge, connecting Senator McConnell's state and Cincinnati in my state. Senator Portman and I worked together to come up with the strongest Buy America laws ever, to strengthen our trade enforcement laws, to protect Ohio workers and Ohio businesses like Whirlpool, expanding access for opioid addiction. The PACT Act, taking care of veterans who are exposed to those football field-sized burn pits, and maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 years later, develop a cancer or a bronchial illness that they need treatment, and they show up at the VA, and because of the PACT Act that Senator Tester, my colleague, the principal writer, and I, also helped write, named after an Ohio in the PACT Act that will save lives. I'm hopeful we continue that bipartisan Ohio tradition with Senator Vance, starting with these common sense reforms to prevent other Ohio communities from facing another disaster. As I told the residents of East Palestine, I'm here for the long haul. The last time I was there, I said to the mayor, I'm going to keep calling you on the phone. I'm going to keep calling the fire chief. I'm going to keep calling Melissa Smith, who owns that candle company. I'm going to show up. I'm not going away until this is fixed, until people's lives are back to normal, until Norfolk Southern is held accountable. When people who don't live in Ohio pack up in a week or two, we're going to still be there for months, for the next year, the next 10 years, if that's what it takes to make this right. I hope my colleagues of both parties will show that same commitment, as Senator Vance is saying, and Senator Rubio, and Senator Casey, and Senator Fetterman, and Senator Hawley. Join us to get something real done for the people whom we serve.
Senator from Ohio.
As consent, the Senate proceed to legislative session, being a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 8 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-619, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
S-619, a bill to require the Director of National Intelligence to declassify information relating to the origin of COVID-19 and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, March 2nd, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed to expire, the journal proceedings be approved to date, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed following the conclusion of morning business. The Senate proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the lawless nomination post-cloture. Further, Mr. President, 11:30 a.m., the Senate vote on confirmation of the lawless nomination, the motion to invoke cloture, and the Gallagher nomination. If cloture is invoked, all post-cloture time be considered expired, and the confirmation votes on the Simmons and Gallagher nominations be at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Republican leader. Further, the Senate recess following the cloture vote on the Gallagher nomination till 1:45, and at 1:45, the Senate vote on confirmation of the Gray nomination. Finally, if any nominations are confirmed during Thursday's session, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. If there's no further business come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senators Lankford and Cruz.
Without objection.